Outside of the SEC this week and the Miami upset, which all those things I will be having episodes on later in the week. The big game that was on my radar was BYU Utah. Obviously, the holy war of Utah. A rivalry that has been instilled for so many years, and finally back with the Big 12 now. And obviously the big storyline is going to be the Mark Harlan press conference, which, pretty much just talking about what is now going to be the infamous press conference. But in essence, it was about the fourth down holding call. And, you know, my initial reaction is, did he hold him? I'd probably say so, but at the same time, it's one of those things where it's kind of a ticky tack call. Whereas, if I were officiating the game, I would have said to myself, "Hey, this didn't really impact the play. He got sacked relatively quick, and the game, quite frankly, should have been over by then." But outside of that call, I think there's just a couple other things that are kind of layered into this whole thing that definitely have to be addressed too. I mean, first and foremost, Utah should have won this game, but not necessarily because of the holding call or the officiating or whatever it is. The reality is that they had so many opportunities to win this game in general. I mean, let's just start off by just going down memory lane here. So obviously we have Brandon Rose, who's first time starter, tried to put Isaac Wilson in there, the young freshman, and clearly he wasn't ready for that moment. So Kyle Whittingham and Mike Badgerjohn, kind of said to themselves, okay, let's put in Brandon Rose and kind of see what he got. And in the first half, he was making all the right decisions. He was efficient. He was getting the ball around to the right guys. And at that point, Utah was looking pretty good, up by 10 points, and Utah's defense was doing their job. I mean, Razliff, obviously, he got sacked 3 times, had nine tackles for loss. So that BYU offensive line, and he just never looked comfortable. And I would argue he looked actually kind of rattled, and maybe even perhaps a little bit confused. I mean, obviously Utah having the home crowd advantage is always going to play a big key factor in these games as well. But I talked about Utah a couple weeks ago. I mean, obviously the big storyline going into this coming year, was always like, hey, can they piece it all together and give Kyle Whittingham that one last Big 12 title, that I guess first Big 12 title, and and the playoff run. But obviously that didn't come to fruition. Now they're kind of trending to perhaps not even making a bowl game now, and it's just quite frankly, it's just definitely been one of the most disappointing teams in college football. I mean, you can even talk about Oklahoma State, who I'll be doing an episode on them as well. And I'll even throw in Kansas too. I mean, Lance Leopold, the expectations are pretty high for them. Him and RJ Young over at Fox Sports, they did a great interview, at the beginning of the season that I really watched. And I certainly believed everything he said. So for me coming into this year, I definitely thought Utah was going to be the favorites going to the Big 12. But obviously, combining with the Cam Rise injury and all that too, it just really just wasn't coming together. But the reality of it too is, outside of the first half, which I think they did a great job on. I think the issues for both these teams too were pretty self evident. I think quite frankly, it was an ugly game. It was a chaotic game for all of the right and wrong reasons, depending on how you want to look at it. BYU went 1 for 12 on third down, and they didn't have a single touchdown until the fourth quarter. So at the same time, it's like you can't put all of this on the officiating too, because Utah, for the most part, when BYU were starting these drives, they were pinned very deep in, on their side of the field. And it's just, you just get to a point of like, how many more times can you expect their defense to get a stop like this too? I mean, when number 9 BYU's on the road and you have all the momentum on your side, and all you're asking for out of your offense is to get a couple field goals here and there in the second half, and just making sure you're not turning the ball over, it just, the bar just should not be set that high. And I think, granted, I'll even go as far to say that I think Utah even just got a little bit way too comfortable going to the second half. I think they kind of said to themselves, hey, we're up by 10. We have this new starting quarterback. We really don't want to be overly aggressive here. So let's just play a really conservative play call. pretty much abandoned everything that they did right in the first half, and then it just opened up too many windows for BYU to, get the ball rolling and to, ultimately get this win too. Because you know, at the same time, like, yes, there is a place and time to criticize the refs. And, Mark Harlan got fined $40,000, which is, for the most part, pretty unprecedented, all things considered. I mean, if you want to go back, you can think about 2010 when Iowa State's head coach got fined. And even then, I believe that was only 25 grand. I mean, granted, too, it's definitely an exuberant amount of money for all things considered, just for a handful of comments. But it's it's two parts, because I think it's a two-part answer to my take on this, because I would argue, for one, I do think there is a point in time where somebody has to be sort of the pioneer to be able to say, yes, we got screwed, we feel we got screwed out of this game, and something needs to be done about it. We could even go back and talk about the Mountain West and San Jose State made a very similar announcement where they pretty much felt like they got kind of screwed out of the game, and the Mountain West was quick to say, oh, well, Mountain West commissioner was pretty, Gloria Estevez, she was pretty quick to, kind of try to nip that in the bud and find them as quickly as possible, which is obviously what Brett Yardmark's going to do too. So you do have that balance too of I do think they have a legitimate reason to be pissed off. Don't get me wrong, because you get to a point where these conversations, I feel like, are just going on and on and on and on, which leads me back to this next point of, you're going to have San Jose State be pissed off. You're going to have Utah be pissed off. And, did Kyle Whittingham and Harlan's comments, were they a little bit out of line? Probably, if you're talking about in terms of a, sort of a professionalism sort of setting where you're kind of saying to yourself, hey, these kind of conversations that you're going to have are supposed to be sidebar conversations, not sidebar private conversations, not necessarily conversations that you're going to be having, to the media and all that too. But another thing I'd like to point out is, obviously, these programs are not as big as, as the Georgias or the Alabamas or Texas, but, what if Steve Sarkisian said something like that? What if Kirby Smart said something like that? If they said something like that, this whole officiating nonsense would be actually taken legitimately seriously. And I've bitched and whined on this show about officiating, particularly in the ACC game, when I talked about the Virginia Tech and Miami game, which I still hold pretty firmly that they got screwed on. You can even talk about the ACC game this weekend with Virginia and Pitt, where essentially, because the officials were asleep at the wheel, essentially Virginia got another down after Pitt stopped them and ultimately cost Pitt the game. Like, to me, that's one. I'm not one for sitting there saying like, oh yeah, officials cost us the game, this, that, or the other. But that giving them that, what in essence was fifth down, that really did fundamentally change the game too. And the Utah game, absolutely it did, in the sense of, hey, they technically got the stop, and it's not like he was sacked too. I mean, if you threw the ball in the guy's direction, that's one thing, and you call the hold there. I don't think too many people would be talking about that too. And even looking back at the replay, did he hold him a little bit? Yeah, I'll say that he held him a little bit, but at the same time too, you come to these certain situations and you have to ask yourself, is this absolutely necessary for this to be called? Because you're just finding such a balance between, calling what's right on the field versus, kind of tic-tacky, nonsense calls. The same thing goes with targeting too. We're all for player safety, and we're all for trying to do what's best in the game. But there comes a point in time where you just kind of have to be a little bit more responsible and a little bit more logical when it comes to these things too, right? Because at the end of the day, the integrity of the game just cannot be compromised in situations like this. The moment that certain teams feel slighted or certain teams feel some sort of way, that's when it all kind of comes crumbling down. And maybe it does take a Steve Sarkisian or a Kirby Smart or a big time program to really start complaining about the officiating, and then something will get done other than an initiative or a sort of a vague statement saying, oh, we're sorry about this. I for example would argue that part of the process of, media availability should be the officials after the game. If the officials are going to sit there and make a call that is in essence going to cost them the game, cost a particular team the game, then yes, they should have to be able to sit up there and defend it. They're getting paid just like everybody else, and I'm not saying, obviously it's not a full-time job for them. I'm sure the majority of them have their own careers, wives, families, all those things, right? And nobody deserves death threats or anything like that. That's not my angle. All I'm getting at is, if you make a call at the end of the game, then yes, they should be able to sit up there and do a quick 5-minute press conference about, any calls that happened, anything that happened on the field, and just be able to give a little bit more context towards these things too. Because I think right now in this day and age of college football, yes, you want more technological advances. And yes, everything is under a microscope because you have people on the internet who bitch about everything no matter what. You have more people watching the product more than ever. But it's where do you find that balance between, letting things slide every once in a while, where, sometimes, hey, you get the wrong call and, it kind of is what it is, versus holding people accountable. And I think in this moment in time, this is one of those instances where, when we're not holding people accountable and we're not willing to have those bigger conversations, those are the games that are ultimately going to be impacting college football even more. And it is going to trickle down into the bigger games too. Now, obviously, we're talking about this on a much smaller scale. However, I do think there's going to become a point in time where, a Big Ten game or an SEC game or an ACC game is going to have some sort of ending like this, and eventually it's all going to come unraveling. But for now, I mean, all things considered, when I was watching this game, I'm on the East Coast, so it was about 1:30, 2 o'clock when it ended over here. But I knew this would be close. I mean, the traditions, the stories, everything that tells itself. You can tell that Utah crowd was probably one of the most electric I've seen since last season. And it's a testament to, what both these programs have done too. I mean, BYU has definitely been one of the biggest surprises all year, and I've hyped them up on this show. And I think no matter what happens to them, they should be damn proud about what they've done. I mean, great job on the comeback, and you did all that, but you definitely have a lot to work on, because all things considered, it was a sloppy game offensively for both these teams. But I think if Utah doesn't take their foot off the gas and they're a little bit more aggressive with the play calling, I get Brandon Rose. Hey, you went 12 for 21, 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. I get you kind of have to let him, you kind of have to let him in slowly, but at the same time, what's positive is, hey, you have your starter for the rest of the season. You know what he's capable of. And I would argue that, open up the playbook a little bit, be more aggressive, because at this point, if it could possibly be Whittingham's last season, and you have a tough game against Colorado next week too, why not try to play some spoiler and be a little bit more aggressive? Because if you're going to beat a team as good as Colorado has been this year, and as great as they've been turning it around, you're going to have to take some chances.